an impeachment of Donald Trump spearheaded by Republicans. That is how far the internal MAGA civil war has escalated. The House of Representatives is no longer divided along the traditional partisan line of Democrat versus Republican. Instead, it is Republicans versus Trump, Republicans versus MAGA, and Republicans versus themselves. The revolt has reached a point where Speaker Mike Johnson has effectively lost control of his own conference, and there is almost nothing he can do to contain it. At the center of this chaos sits an issue that would have sounded absurd only a few months ago: Greenland. But to understand why Greenland has become the accelerant of this political wildfire, you have to look at how thoroughly Trump has alienated his party. Instead of working to shore up vulnerable incumbents, instead of helping the GOP defend its razor-thin majority, instead of focusing on legislation that might actually help Republican candidates survive the next midterm, Trump has been pouring time, resources, and political capital into what many lawmakers consider a fantasy project: cutting checks to Greenland. For senior Republicans, this is a nightmare scenario. Trump has single-handedly placed the party in one of the weakest political positions of the modern era. Donors are frustrated, polling is deteriorating, and districts that were considered safely red are suddenly within striking distance for Democrats. The calculus is simple: Trump's Greenland fixation does nothing to help Republicans keep their seats, and everything to harm them. Which brings us to the bombshell moment. A sitting Republican lawmaker in the House is now openly floating the idea of impeachment, not as a rhetorical threat, not as a cable news soundbite, but as a serious tool to force Trump back into line or remove him altogether. That is the shockwave tearing through Washington, and it is the reason impeachment is no longer a fringe topic whispered in closed-door meetings. It is now a real option being discussed in the open. Before diving into the specifics, the YouTube host reminds viewers to like and subscribe, not just out of habit, but because what follows demands attention. There are, of course, countless reasons one could make an impeachment case against Trump less than a year into his presidency. His governance style alone has raised constitutional, diplomatic, and financial alarms across the political spectrum. But for MAGA world, the breaking point isn't foreign policy or scandal or executive overreach, it's Greenland. And that is where Chris Hayes enters the story. His recent reporting did not merely explain why Trump is obsessed with Greenland. It laid out how that obsession is now detonating inside the Republican Party. It showed how a geopolitical vanity project designed to secure Trump's legacy has instead turned into an anchor around the GOP's neck, dragging the party toward a crisis none of them were prepared to handle.
The actual basis for this saber rattling is also completely nonsensical, even at just a kind of practical level. There is no national security need for us to control a country that is already our ally in the NATO alliance, part of U.S. missile defense for 70 years. In fact, we already have a military base in Greenland. And I'll confess, I didn't used to know that, but you know how I do know that? I know it because Vice President J.D. Vance went to that base last year, and I promise he knows it exists. Trump wants it, it appears, because, and this is the way he said it, it's important to him psychologically, because it's big. He basically admitted as much to the New York Times. Ownership is very important, Trump said, as he discussed with a real estate mogul's eye the landmass of Greenland. When asked why he needed to possess the territory, he said, because that's what I feel is psychologically needed for success. I think that ownership gives you a thing that you can't do, whether you're talking about a lease or a treaty. Ownership gives you things and elements that you can't just get from signing a document. Now, the other part of this, and it's almost too stupid to spend time on, but we have to. He also likes how it looks on the map. I mean, look how, man, look at that. Look how big and strategically important it is. And this is a person who's got weird issues about bigness. But as you map nerds out there know, that is purely due to an optical illusion with the Mercator projection when it attempts to display a spherical planet on a flat map, as you can see in this GIF from geographer Jakob Nowasad. I mean, Greenland is pretty big, don't get me wrong. It is not continent-sized. And I honestly do think that's why Donald Trump wants it. That's a theory we've been kicking around for a while on this show.
Yeah, it's so sad for me to hear you say, I think it has something to do with the Mercator projection. Like that's where our politics have come to, that we have to think about the kind of maps that we are showing our imbecile president of the United States.
And so here we are. I mean, it's surreal. It's like a waking nightmare. So much of this period is. But we're near the precipice of what would be a totally unprecedented geopolitical crisis in the post-World War II era. I mean, it would move us off a period in history that is outside of the World War period of history and back towards that kind of world. Donald Trump could blow up NATO at any second, which of course would be a feature rather than a bug for this administration.
The factual basis for this saber rattling is also completely nonsensical, even at a purely practical level. There is no national security need for the United States to control a country that is already our ally in the NATO alliance, a country that has been part of US missile defense strategy for 70 years. In fact, we already have a military base in Greenland, and I'll confess, I didn't used to know that, but I know it now because Vice President J.D. Vance went to that base last year, and I promise he knows it exists. Trump wants Greenland, it appears, because, based on the way he described it, it's important to him psychologically because it's big. He basically admitted as much to the New York Times. Ownership is very important, Trump said, examining the landmass of Greenland with a real estate mogul's eye. When asked why he needed to possess the territory, he said, I think that ownership gives you a thing that you can't do. Whether you're talking about a lease or a treaty, ownership gives you things and elements that you can't just get from signing a document. The other part of this, and it's almost too stupid to spend time on, but we have to, is that he also likes how it looks on a map. Look at it. He says, look how big and strategically important it is. And this is a person who has weird issues about bigness. But as map nerds know, that appearance is purely the result of an optical illusion caused by the Mercator projection when it attempts to display a spherical planet on a flat map. As you can see from geographer Jacob Nosau's illustration, Greenland is big, no doubt, but it is not continent-sized, and I honestly do think that's why Donald Trump wants it. That's a theory we've been kicking around on this show for a while. It's sad that we've reached a point where we actually have to analyze map projections to understand the motivations of the President of the United States. But here we are. It is surreal, like a waking nightmare. And so much of this political period feels that way. We are nearing the precipice of what could become an unprecedented geopolitical crisis in the post-World War II era. It would move us out of the stable international order that has existed since that time and back toward a far more dangerous world. Donald Trump could blow up NATO at any moment, which of course would be a feature rather than a bug for this administration.